Welcome to Haunted or Hoax. I'm Jennifer, and as you can tell, I am missing my partner in podcast this episode. Unfortunately, we both ended up getting sick over the past week, thanks a lot COVID, and we weren't able to record. So we decided to pull one of our dress rehearsal episodes from the archives and share it with you guys. This was never intended to be shared with anyone, so lucky you, you get to hear it in all of its newbie glory. If you're new here, this is not usually how things go. Usually, Kristen and I get together and talk about the legends and history behind ghost stories. Kristen sharing the paranormal, and I share the history. This week and next will be a little different, and we're going to be sharing the two-part story of Lizzie Borden. This is a two-parter because there was just so much information. So this first part covers the history of the Borden house as well as the murders and the trial. We hope you enjoy. Are you drumming?
It's from Amazon. It's a box. You hear it?
Oh, now I do. I didn't hear
There
it
you
before.
go.
I just saw your hands hovering. I was like,
little pretend, little sign language drumming of a
gonna wave
box
in
you
front of
guys
the
can't
camera.
see.
Anyway, we're talking about Lizzie Borden today.
Yes.
Of course, everybody knows the story about Lizzie Borden and the terrible murders that she allegedly, but was acquitted for, did.
But we
We
haven't
thought it
heard
would
it from
be.
Jennifer, so
Well, that's true.
yeah.
That's a lot of pressure.
I mean, you'll do great.
I'm not the official person. I just find my sources and figure out if they're legit or not and then tell you about them.
Well, that's the best kind.
Yes. So, if we're all good, let's get started.
Yes, definitely.
As we all know, this happened in Fall River, Massachusetts. We are actually going to start the story a little earlier than the quote 40 wax that happened in 1982.
Mhm.
I'm going to start in
1892. It's okay. It's all right. Listen, I listened to a podcast earlier and she did the same exact thing a million times. If we say 1982 or 1985, it's 1892 and 1895. We're not mathematicians. We're not historians. We're just
Clearly we can barely read if I'm flipping the numbers around.
Listen, we have whatever the number dyslexia is called. I have that very badly. So
Okay,
don't
let's
judge us.
keep a tally. Don't say anything.
Okay.
Keep a tally. And then whoever has the least amount of tallies wins a can of wine.
Oh, perfect.
Okay.
Oh,
great.
man.
You're going to win. All right. So this happened before the big murder in 1892. I'm talking about something that happened in 1848, 44 years earlier before Lizzie was even born. So Lizzie's great uncle, his name was Lodwick, and it's actually shown in various different versions. Apparently, the script back then, the cursive was really hard to read, so people kind of interpret it. But the source I used has an actual picture of his headstone, which I feel like is a pretty good source. So it's spelled Lawdwick, Lodwick Borden. He was actually living in the house before Lizzie's family was. And Lodwick liked the ladies. He actually ended up having 4 wives total.
Holy crap.
Lodwick was living in the house at the time with his second wife, Eliza Darling Borden. Which, can we just make a side note of how much I love the name Darling? It just reminds me
so sweet.
Peter Pan.
I actually am not the biggest fan of Peter Pan, but I do love like Wendy Darling. I like that.
Isn't that just the best name?
Yes.
So anyway, he was living in the house with Eliza, and it was actually a 2-family house. It was a split house, and they lived on one side and then they rented the other.
Oh, nice.
At the age of 37 was the time this story takes place. She had already had 3 children that were very close in age. Holder was 1, Eliza Ann was 2, and Maria was 3. So it's pretty back to back. I couldn't get the actual birth dates of all of the kids without making an ancestry login. So these are just the dates on the headstones. But those are rough accounts of their ages. So the story goes that Eliza allegedly suffered from really bad postpartum depression, and you can imagine having 3 kids.
Yeah.
Not even a year apart from each other. That would be a lot to handle. So in her depression, she just got to this really bad low and she threw all 3 of her children down the well of the property,
Ugh.
which it's called a cistern, and it's essentially just like a private well that would be in the cellar, not like out back. Um,
Oh,
so then after she did that, she committed suicide. And there's like different accounts of how the suicide happened. In my opinion, it doesn't really matter how it happened.
yes, it's still like
Just
horrific.
yeah,
So
just
we
that
don't
it
need the
happened.
details.
No. Um, as far as the children go, 2 of the children drowned. Maria was the only one to survive. There were stories that Lodwick actually committed suicide shortly thereafter, but that isn't true. He went on to marry 2 more times, and then he died in 1874 at the age of 62. So that was kind of the backstory of the house, and I thought it was kind of important to include that
Right.
in the
Oh yeah, for
prehistory
sure.
because I thought it was very interesting that a murder happened beforehand and a
Right.
very strange murder at that. Like, you don't really hear of mothers murdering their children very often.
Right. And then like also they are related to the Bordens.
Mhm.
It's not like they were some random family that lived there beforehand. They are like blood relatives.
Exactly. So just file that away for later on.
I will.
So
Trust me.
let's zoom forward about 30 years. Andrew, which is Lizzie's dad, purchased the home in 1872. It was a 2-family home at the time, like we talked about. He remodeled it and turned it into a 1-family home. It was very close to his business in Main Street. It was not where the prestigious families lived, which was usually called the Hill, is where they lived. It was closer to kind of in town. And Fall River was not the nicest place. The ritzy part obviously was very nice,
Right.
but in town it was not a very pretty city. There were like opium rings and stories of arson very frequently. It was a cotton mill town, so a lot of the laborers worked like 14 hour days, and it was just a very rough place to live. So it wasn't very common that the wealthy people lived closer in town. They usually all lived kind of up. And just to give you an idea of how wealthy Andrew Borden was at the time in our modern day money, he would have been worth $6 million.
Damn. That
So,
is so much money.
so very, very well off. But he decided to just combine the house into a single family home, and him and his girls moved in there. He had a business as a carpenter, and this sentence cracked me up because it says he also ran a furniture and undertaking business, but there wasn't any separation there. So
What?
I'm really hoping that there was supposed to be a comma in there. Oxford commas are important. And I'm hoping that they were 2 completely separate businesses and he wasn't like making furniture like Ed Gein style. Um,
How resourceful for the time though, honestly.
ooh. um,
Keep
but
your
he
loved
ended
one
up
here with you forever.
sit with them a little while longer.
Exactly.
But he was actually a self-made businessman. He
Mhm.
created his own wealth. It wasn't like old money. And he became very successful. He did a lot of real estate investment as well. He owned a lot of properties in the area, like rental properties and stuff like that. He was known for being very thrifty, I guess is going to be the word. He was known for making ready made coffins, which I'm not really sure what the alternative, like if there were custom made coffins in the time.
DIY coffins. He just gives you the material. He sells you the material and he gives you the instructions. And he's like, Pinterest, do it yourself.
This is an IKEA based company. We believe in
Yes, it's the
keeping your
first.
loved one together with their coffin,
Exactly.
instructions included.
Yes.
Nails might be missing. However, there were stories as an undertaker that to instead of creating a brand new coffin for the individual who passed, if they didn't quite fit, he would cut off their feet to fit inside the coffin. I mean,
No.
obviously they're not like going to get up and go anywhere. They don't need their feet. But I'd be very upset if I found out that somebody like removed my grandmother's ankles because she was a little too tall.
Right. And then where do
So
you put them?
just like kind
In
of put
his
him up,
boxes, in his pockets.
put him up underneath the petticoat a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Just
Bury them. I thought you
it's
were
just like he just
he
like
just
saved them
chopped
for
them off.
later. I'm
Literal.
stopping. We are stopping. All right. So anyway, he was a very successful businessman. He married Sarah Morse in 1845, and they had 3 children, which was Emma, Alice, and Lizzie. Lizzie was born in 1860, just to kind of give you the idea of the timeline. Alice died, which was Lizzie's older sister, in 1858, and then his wife Sarah died shortly thereafter in 1863. Andrew then married Abby Gray 3 years later. So it was, a couple years in between, but it was like big life changes.
Pretty quick. Do we know what her sister and her mom died of?
I do not. I couldn't find that anywhere.
So,
From what I'm understanding is the census that they took at the time, like everybody was complaining about how terrible the handwriting was. And I don't know if it's because people have a hard time reading cursive now.
because we're old millennials and we still had to learn that in school, so we know.
I actually had a discussion with my coworkers about that this morning, about the importance of learning cursive.
Honestly, it's a skill that everybody needs to have.
But also, handwriting is so personal that I feel like there's a very real chance that somebody's handwriting could be a little too flourished and
Right.
too many swoops on the S, and all of a sudden Sarah turns into Blaira. So I'm not really sure. I don't know if you found anything in your research on how
I
they died.
didn't, so that's why I was like wondering. I didn't really find any like explanation. And maybe it was just like they don't know. People don't know. Maybe it was, again, my go-to, tuberculosis. When in doubt, it's tuberculosis or like yellow fever or
Well, we
something.
certainly know it wasn't COVID.
No. No.
Huh. So anyway, since Andrew remarried, Abby helped raise the girls. At first, it was a pretty good relationship because they were obviously very young. But as they got older, there was some resentment there, and the girls went from calling her mother to calling her Mrs. Borden. So there was a little bit of,
There's tension when you're calling your stepmom Mrs. Borden.
can you imagine? You should start doing that.
Yeah, I'm gonna call my stepdad Mr. Murphy. He would be like, "What the fuck are you doing?"
Why are you talking? So quit being weird. So as the girls get older, they're kind of able to figure out, piece things together and what's going on. They believe that Abby is out for their father's money. There are some stories that Abby's stepsister got some property from Andrew. And so then the girls were like, well, if you're going to help her out, then, pay out.
Right.
So a little bit of back and forth. They were able to get a rental property. He gave them a rental property. Turns out needed a lot of repairs, as rental properties do. So after they put in a bunch of money into it, he bought the property back at double the price. So they actually were able to make some money.
Nice.
So it's not like he was ignoring them. It just seemed like he was trying to make things right, and he just couldn't. And obviously, we don't know the full story. It's just based on the testimony that was given during the trials. But we'll get to that. So the sisters do go on and help manage some rental properties. The family does really well. They obviously have really good money, and they're able to employ some servants around the house, which is pretty common for that day. As I said, Andrew was a very frugal man. He liked where his house was. He did not want to move, even though he was making really good money and could afford a bigger house. He liked how close it was to his businesses, just a quick walk into town. The house is very, very close to Main Street. And so he just didn't want to move. Also, the house had no electricity or indoor plumbing, which
no thank you.
It does now. But at the time, even though electricity and indoor plumbing was newer, it would have been a very common thing to have in nicer homes.
Like a rich person's house.
Yeah.
So they had cars then. So yeah. The cars were made in like
the Model T wasn't until 1908.
But there was other cars, wasn't there? I'm pretty sure cars were invented in like 1870 something.
When were cars invented?
The answer I found is 1885.
Hey, serious, my girl. But I think that's like I'm saying, like in the 1800s, like cars were like probably like a rich person thing too.
I
So
see
if
what
you're
you're
gonna
saying.
be like a rich person, you're gonna have the plumbing and the electricity, the cars. You're gonna be a head and shoulders above other people, I feel like.
So I'm glad you brought that up because that was actually something that I researched. Because the day of the murders, Emma is out of town in Fairfield, Massachusetts, which is a 19-minute drive, but a 5-hour walk.
Oh my God. No.
So that's why I looked up when cars were invented and like when they became common.
Right.
And it seemed like in the 1900s, the cars became common because that was the Model T and that's when people could
Right.
afford them. And if they don't use electricity or plumbing,
They're probably not one of the rich people that have a car.
but they did hire servants.
That's true.
So I don't really know if the Bordens owned a car. If you can find out what kind of car, Mustang, T-Bird, Rolls Royce, what kind of car did the Bordens own, and tweet it to us.
That would be so helpful. We would love you so much.
And just call us idiots for not understanding the car history. But we'll get there.
We're not car people.
We aren't car people.
We're ghost people.
And wine people. So let's get down to the gross facts. As I said, Emma was out of town visiting family in Fairfield, Massachusetts, which is either a short hop away or a long walk away, depending on how she got there.
Right.
To be determined, I guess. The day before the murders, on August 3rd, 1892, Abby, which again is Lizzie's stepmother, goes to see Dr. Bowen and tells him that she's worried that they've been poisoned. Apparently, almost the entire house came down with a really bad stomach bug, and she's worried, oddly enough, that they very specifically have been poisoned. Again, file that away. That's at 8 o'clock a.m. So Dr. Bowen goes and checks on the Bordens, and then Andrew's like, what the fuck are you doing here? We didn't call you. I'm not paying for this. So that was that little instance. Dr. Bowen did testify that he saw Lizzie running up the stairs as soon as he got there. So then at 10, anywhere from 10 to 11:30 a.m., Lizzie visits the pharmacy on Main and Columbia Street and attempts to buy prussic acid from the pharmacist.
What does that do?
That is a poison.
Oh.
It is cyanide.
Oh, perfect.
You know, for her headaches.
Casually.
So the pharmacist is like, no, you can't have that. I'm sorry. And so she doesn't get it. Again, file that away.
Okay. I'm filing so many things away.
Your file cabinet's going to be very big.
It's going to be stuffed. It's not going to be able to shut.
So sorry. I hope you have a lot of files. Very color-coded tabs and everything.
Yes.
So noon, Lizzie joins her father and stepmother for supper, lunch, in the dining room. Noon 30, her uncle Morse takes the train from New Bedford to Fall River. 1:30, her uncle gets there. Anywhere from 2 to 4, her uncle and her father start talking in the sitting room. There's a little back and forth about what they were talking about, but the main gist of what he came to visit Andrew about is money.
Of course.
Inheritance, real estate, stuff like that. Apparently, Andrew was very closed about finances and he was very finicky with the pocketbook. He was not obviously crazy with his money.
I mean, he didn't have electricity or plumbing and he had enough money to do that. So he was frugal, I guess.
I'm sure he was like, look, John, I still poop outside.
Right. I
So
shit in the bushes and I read by candlelight. What do you want from me?
That outhouse door has been broken for years.
Exactly.
I use a coffin door instead.
Oh.
So they are talking outside in the sitting room. 4 p.m., Morse hires a horse and wagon and drives to Swansea in the late afternoon. This is important. 7 p.m., Lizzie visits her best friend, Alice Russell, and tells her she's afraid something will happen. And that is in quotations. 8:45 p.m., her uncle returns and talks and hangs out with Andrew and Abby a little bit longer. 9 p.m., Lizzie returns from her friend's house, comes in, locks the front door, and immediately goes to her room without speaking to anybody. 9:15, Abby goes to bed. 10 o'clock, Andrew and her uncle go to bed. So that was the night before. The day of, their servant Bridget goes downstairs, gets some coal to start the fire in the kitchen stove, and brings in the milk. What a day to bring in the milk from outside. I'm so glad I don't have to do that. I can't even bring in my mail on a regular basis.
Yeah, I don't even remember to take out my trash and put it right outside my door or take anything in. So my milk would be moldy.
We would constantly have cheese outside our front door.
Oh yeah, but I like cheese, so it might work out.
6:20, her uncle goes downstairs in the sitting room. 6:30, Abby comes downstairs, gives breakfast orders for Bridget. 6:40 to 6:50, Andrew comes downstairs, does farm things. Apparently they had pears, a lot of pears around the house. I don't know if you've heard this from your stories.
I've not.
But the pear trees were abundant around the Borden house. So he went outside and picked some pears and then goes into the barn.
I love that.
6:45, Bridget opens the back door for the Iceman. So the back door is open. 7 o'clock, the Bordens and Morris have breakfast.
Gosh, these people are up early.
I know, 7 a.m.
Anyway.
I was thinking, oh, that's 7 a.m. No, that's still East Coast time. That's still early.
It's still early.
Lizzie is still upstairs. She hasn't come down yet. 7:15, Bridget sees Morris for the first time at the breakfast table. 7:30, Bridget eats her breakfast, then clears the dishes. So at 8:45, after some mingling, Andrew lets Morris outside the back door and then invites him back for dinner. 8:45, he leaves for the post office and then went to go visit a niece nearby and like on a side street. Andrew goes back upstairs, gets ready for the day, and then comes back downstairs. Abby gives orders to Bridget, their house servant, to wash the windows inside and out. And Lizzie finally comes downstairs, making her grand entrance at roughly 9 a.m.
That's me on the weekends.
Bridget responds by going outside to vomit. I'm just not in response. She's still sick from...
Oh, she's still sick from the maybe poisoning.
From the maybe poisoning.
Or the milk cheese.
Yeah. So at 9 a.m., Andrew leaves the house. Bridget composes herself, comes back in, doesn't see Lizzie, sees Abby cleaning up, and notices that Andrew is in the house. 9 a.m., Abby goes up to the guest room and isn't seen again alive. Bridget cleans away all of the breakfast dishes, gets everything picked up, and then goes out and starts getting ready to wash the windows. Anywhere from 9:30 to 10 a.m., obviously they don't have an exact time, Abby Borden dies from 18 blows to the back of the head with a sharp instrument. So in the pictures, it looks like she's kneeling.
Right.
She's face forward, and it kind of looks like she fell on her knees and fell forward. But what actually happened is the police officer came in and noticed that her skirts were pulled up above her knees, which was very improper of the time. So instead of pulling all of her petticoats down and the skirt, he just pulled the top layer of the skirt down over her legs. So what you're seeing is not her falling forward and like kneeling. It's not her rump. It is the entire bustle of all of her underdresses.
Gotcha.
Bunched up. If you look at the side view, which there amazingly are many pictures of this crime scene, on the side, you can tell that she's actually laying face down flat on the floor. So 9:30, Andrew is still not there. He's running errands. He went to the bank, talked to some people at the bank. He went to another bank, talked to some people at that bank, went to one more bank and deposited a check. The man was getting it done.
Right. Had the errands.
Making that money. At the same time, Lizzie's uncle Morris was visiting multiple people at different parts of the city. Fast forward a little bit, Bridget is outside washing windows. Nobody sees Lizzie anywhere. Bridget comes in at about 10:20 from the side door, starts washing windows inside. Andrew comes home at about 10:40, but he can't get in the side door. He fumbles with the key at the front door and he can't get it open. So he knocks on the door. Bridget lets him in and she can't get the door open either. So she ends up cursing in Gaelic and she hears Lizzie laugh at the top of the stairs. about her cursing in Gaelic.
I want somebody to tweet at us a Gaelic curse because I want to know what one is.
This says Pshaw. Pshaw.
Shaw. It sounds like somebody's shooting. It's shooting somebody, so
That sounds like something you would do with like a karate chop.
right.
Pshaw. So she finally gets the door open, and Lizzie comes downstairs and starts speaking to her father. Bridget mentions that they are speaking very low to each other, so she can't really make out what they're saying. 10:40, Andrew goes upstairs and then returns in a few minutes and decides to lay down on the living room sofa. 10:45, another thing to file away. Mary Chase, over at the Wade store, sees a man on the Borden fence taking some pears. Remember the pear trees I said earlier?
Right.
There's just some random man picking pears, which I feel like is a little presumptuous. Don't they know that might be poison?
Well, I mean, also, Mary, mind your own business. Maybe Andrew said he could take some pears. They have an abundance. So
The amount of witnesses in this entire trial just shows you how freaking nosy everybody is in this town. I'm sure it was the most interesting thing
that has ever happened in any of their lives. Probably.
It's true. 10:45, Lizzie asks Bridget if she's going out and lets her know that Abby got a note that one of her friends was sick and that Abby went out, and that there's a sale at Sargent's. I don't know what that is, but it sounds nice. 10:50, Mark Chase observes a man with an open buggy parked just beyond the tree in front of the Borden's house. 10:55, Bridget goes up to her room in the attic and lays down in her bed. Gonna file that away for later too. I hope you're keeping your notes organized.
Yes, I'm following.
Okay.
All up here.
11 a.m., Andrew Borden dies from 10 blows to the head with a sharp instrument. So the difference is Abby, all of her blows were to the back of the head. Okay. Andrew, all of his blows were to the left side of his face. It was so bad that I'm sure everybody has seen those gruesome crime scene photos, but his eyeball was laying on his cheek.
Yikes.
11 a.m., Bridget hears the city hall clock chime. 11:10, Lizzie hollers to Bridget to come down. Quote, someone has killed father. She then sends Bridget to Dr. Bowen. Bridget comes back and says that Dr. Bowen is not in. So Lizzie sends Bridget to her friend Alice Russell's house, not to the other two doctors that lived on her street.
Right. That's kind of strange.
Well, they were both immigrants, and nobody liked us Irish people.
I mean, surprising. Racism in America? I don't.
Bridget goes and rushes over to Alice's house because I guess Alice is like the next best thing to a doctor. Mrs. Churchill, across the street, notices Bridget crossing the street and sees Lizzie and calls out, and Lizzie responds, someone's killed father. So Mrs. Churchill lets Mrs. Gormley know that Mrs. Borden is murdered pretty much in a span of, and I wish that I would share this timeline for you, but it would take a second. There's like this perfect game of telephone where Mrs. Gormley tells Mrs. Churchill, and Mrs. Churchill tells Mr. Cunningham, and Mr. Cunningham tells Marshal Hillard, and Marshal Hillard tells Officer Allen, and Officer Allen tells Dr. Bowen. And it's just like, you can just see, it kind of reminded me of like ants when just one drop of water falls and one starts scurrying and then they all kind of scurry.
Right.
That's what this sounds like.
It's a little domino effect.
However, Dr. Bowen finally gets home, figures out what's going on. He gets there at 11:20 and sees Andrew and covers up the body. A couple of officers come. Everybody's walking through the house. Everybody's taking notes. However, it's not until 11:30 that Lizzie asks to check on Mrs. Borden. Then Bridget and Mrs. Churchill, who the fuck is Mrs. Churchill, go upstairs and find Abby's body upstairs. So then after that, a lot of interrogation goes on. They're making notes of things, where the bodies were laying, who had been around. That's why it was important to note the people outside picking pears.
Right.
They notice an axe, and then they also notice a pail of bloody rags. and they take note of Lizzie's clothes and ask her to hand over all of her clothes, all of her sister's clothes, and they just kind of take account of everything. Something odd that officers did note was the lack of remorse that Lizzie was displaying. She was very nonchalant about all of this, which I feel like ultimately isn't really fair because you can't.
Right, you can't tell what a like victim's family is thinking
Mhm.
or feeling just by like if because they didn't cry and scream doesn't mean that they're guilty of
Right.
murder.
There is no script for grief.
Exactly.
And just because you're not following it doesn't mean you're a psychopath.
Right.
But I mean, sometimes it does. So, 11:55, Marshall Fleet arrives, sees the bodies, talks to Lizzie in her room with the Reverend, and Lizzie says, "She's not my mother. She's my stepmother." And
I
everybody
mean,
made a note.
she's dead, dude. I don't feel like that matters anymore.
So they took lots of crime scene photos. They brought the bodies back to the coroners and they did a full autopsy. And then the entire investigation started going. Lizzie and her sister actually hired a private investigator, put in a reward in the paper, all that good stuff to try and find the killer. They were
Wow.
both very adamant that somebody broke in and murdered their father and stepmother.
Mm.
So the suspects were kind of wishy-washy.
Okay.
Immigrants were the first one that they looked at.
Of course.
Obviously, the people picking the pears out front and all that, the guy sitting in the cart. They looked at that, didn't lead anywhere. They were really looking into the Irish immigrants like nearby. Nothing panned out. Emma was looked at, but they came to the conclusion that she was too far away.
Right. She couldn't
There's
come back
still,
and walk 5 hours to kill her parents.
if she was driving a Mustang, she might have been able to do it though.
Exactly.
There was some speculation, and there's still some speculation, that it was a collaboration between Abby and her uncle, that they wanted to get married and get the inheritance. There's also speculation that Abby and her sister planned it.
You mean
I'm sorry, Lizzie and her sister
Lizzie is
planned it and collaborated on it, and just Lizzie carried it out. Ultimately, it was decided that Lizzie did it, and she was arrested on August 11th, 1892, which good on them for making an arrest so quickly. Can you imagine if somebody
right.
got arrested that quickly nowadays?
Right. I mean, they should take notes. Police today should take notes from the 1800s and get things done as quickly as they did. Maybe
Mhm.
don't let people walk around the crime scene. It's the only
Right.
thing. That's the only caveat I take away. Don't
Correct.
do that. That didn't happen here, I don't think, but it happened a lot.
I mean, there were a lot of people walking around. There were, I mean, obviously, Mrs. What's her face found the body upstairs. Mrs. Crawford,
No, Churchill, right?
Churchill. There was
I
a
only
Crawford in there.
I only remember because of Winston Churchill.
This is distant cousin.
It would just be really great if like his wife was there for no reason.
Really, it was just this giant dinner party. Now she's been arrested. They come and they were like, "Do you want to see your arrest warrant?" She's like, "Fuck no, I don't. You've been hounding me about this for days. Like, I know what you're arresting me for.
Right.
Whatever." So she gets taken to the jail and then the trial ensues. So let's just talk about the trial for a second. The trial was held in front of a jury of her peers, which was roughly 20 white males.
Oh, so people just like Lizzie.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, perfect.
And they were like dead set that she did it. They had tons and tons of witnesses. And I don't know if you knew this, but you can find the entire trial online. There is a 926-page PDF that goes through the witness questioning, the juror questionnaire, the evidence, and the testimonies of everybody.
That is crazy
I did
to
not read
me.
all 900 pages, but I would like to go back and forth about this little question and answer right here. We're going to role play. You are A, which
Okay,
is Emma Borden.
perfect. I am the oldest sister. That is fitting. Okay, let's go. And scene.
Whatever. I am the district attorney. You ready?
Yes.
Do you still say that the relations between your stepmother and your sister Lizzie were cordial?
The last 2 or 3 years, they were very.
Notwithstanding that she never used the term mother.
Yes, sir.
They remain cordial.
For the last 3 years, they were.
For how many years before that were they not cordial?
I can't tell you. I don't know.
Now, I want to ask you if you didn't say this. Were the relations between you and your stepmother cordial? Your answer was, I don't know how to answer that. We always spoke.
That was myself and my stepmother.
Do you remember that answer?
I do now.
Quote, that might be and not be at all cordial. Answer, quote, well, perhaps I should say no then. Do you remember that? Talking about yourself?
No, sir, I don't remember.
Quote, were the relations between your sister and your mother what you would call cordial? Answer, quote, I think more than they were with me. Do you remember that answer?
Yes, sir.
Next question is pretty long. Somewhat more than they were with you, but not entirely so. You mean perhaps? I do not want to lead you at all. I judged from your answer you mean that, or you don't mean that. You say somewhat more than your relations were. Do you mean they were entirely cordial between your stepmother and your sister Lizzie? Your answer being no.
Well, I shall have to recall it, for I think they were.
That is, do you remember giving that answer?
No, sir.
How does it happen that you remember the answer in which you did not explicitly state whether they were cordial or not, but don't remember an answer, if one was given, in which you said they were not cordial, which was the following question?
I don't understand. Me either, girl.
This is a little involved, perhaps. Do you recall the question next preceding that in which you said, quote, somewhat more than they were with me, question?
Not until you read it. I did not.
Do you recall it then?
Yes, I think I did.
But when the next question, if I may assume to say so, was put to you, if it was put and such an answer was given by you, you don't now recall that answer.
I don't seem to remember it.
Will you say you didn't say that?
No, sir, not if you say I did.
And would you say that was not true? I haven't said you did at all, Mrs. Borden. Miss Borden, off script. If you will pardon me, don't understand me as saying that you said anything so that I think the answer is not pertinent to my question. Do you recall now that it is read to you saying that?
No, sir, I don't.
The stenographer then read the preceding question as follows. Will you say you didn't say that? Answer, no, sir, not if you say I did. Do you understand me saying I do? Now, I do not say you did and have no right to say you did. I haven't said anything about it. I am asking whether you gave that answer to such a question that, quote, do you mean they were entirely cordial between your stepmother and your sister Lizzie? The answer was no.
I can only say I don't remember giving it.
Whether you said it or not, do you say that it is true that relations were not entirely cordial between your sister Lizzie and your stepmother?
I think that they were for the last 3 years.
So whatever you said then, you say now. You say that is so now. And then her lawyer went in and said, well, I submit. And then he decided that he wasn't going to press the question anymore.
Well, because it doesn't make any sense. Was this man drunk while he was questioning Emma? I would have been so angry. I would have been like, what are, like, I went through the looking glass here. What the hell?
So when I text you saying my eyes were crossing, it was at that point that I was like, what the fuck?
I don't like, I mean, I would say no, I don't remember because I have no idea what you're talking about. That is
So
crazy.
that was pretty much the gist of the entire trial. It was very like inconsistent testimony, particularly from Lizzie. Lizzie actually had changing stories. She would say that she was upstairs, and then she would say she was downstairs, and then she'd say that she was upstairs, and then I don't remember if I'm upstairs. I was in the barn, but I don't know why I was in the barn. Never mind, I was downstairs. Never mind, I was upstairs taking a nap. So it was all changing. And it was always the opposite of what Bridget said. And Bridget was like the key witness, obviously, because she was the only other person in the house that survived. Another big point of the trial was that nobody told them when they buried the bodies of Abby and Andrew that the coroner saved the heads
No.
and he decapitated them
Oh my God.
and then he boiled them
Oh no.
so that the skin was off. So they presented this as evidence and didn't tell anybody that they were going to do it. And so it was a big thing that
Like, surprise. Like, surprise. Here's the worst evidence ever.
it was called the faint or the swoon heard across the world because when they presented the skulls, Lizzie passed out.
I would too.
Well, have you seen the skulls?
I know. I didn't even know they did this. I knew she fainted, but I guess I just totally skipped over that she fainted because they showed her parents' skulls.
So here is Mr. Andrews.
Oh no.
Is that not terrible?
That's awful. He's like missing just a whole pretty much chunk of his head.
Mm-hmm.
His,
And like his entire upper jaw is missing.
that is,
So that was Andrew. And then that was after the decapitation.
no, thank you.
And then we will not be putting these on our Instagram.
No,
However,
you
if you
can
would
look
like to see them, you can go to lizzieandrewborden.com and they have oodles and oodles of stuff. This breaks my heart. This was Abby's. That's the back of Abby's head.
Ugh, that's
Just
so awful.
absolutely brutal. And again, nobody gave the girls any forewarning that this was coming. So they just saw their parents' skulls presented on the stand.
Yeah, I would. I would faint too.
It's just terrible.
No.
So that was a big point. The last big point was that Lizzie burned a dress after the bodies were found.
Mm-hmm.
And she told her sister, she pulled it up to her sister, and she was like, "Hey, this dress is covered in paint. Do you think I should burn it?" And her sister said, "Yeah, you probably should." And so she burnt the dress that was covered in red paint.
Oh, yeah, casual. Like, what
After
was she painting?
apparently the back room where they did their sewing was being painted, but it had been painted well before then.
Got you.
And so they burned the dress like the night that their parents were murdered. The other thing, I don't know, remember, go through your file cabinet when I mentioned the bucket of bloody rags that they found.
Right.
The police officers were like, "Hey, what are you doing with all those bloody rags?" And she's like, "I'm menstruating." And then that was the end of that conversation.
If you ever want to end a conversation with a man, just say you're on your period. That's all you have to say. And then they'll walk out so quickly or they'll shut down. It's
Because
amazing.
after 150 years, the talk of menstruation still gets men to shut down.
It's amazing.
So that was the end of that. They didn't bring it up again. After everything was said and done, they got the 5,000 witness statements. The jurors got together and decided that all of the evidence was circumstantial, and Lizzie was acquitted. Actually, June 11th, she was acquitted.
Wow.
So it was a pretty quick thing. Actually, it was June 20th, 1893, that she was acquitted. After the trial, even though she was acquitted, she tried to get away from all of it, but people didn't want to let it go. There was that nursery rhyme that actually became very famous, which was completely incorrect. There was nothing like 40 whacks. I mean, honestly, like 18 blows.
That's a lot.
That is a lot. Like my brain gets to 3 and I'm like, nah, they're dead. I'm good.
Right.
That's a lot of energy to put into doing
Yeah, and I
someone
feel
in.
like an axe or a hatchet is kind of heavy after a while, and I'm just out of shape. I wouldn't be able to do that.
18 though, like count
Yeah.
that out in your head.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. So, but it's not 40,
Right.
not 40 whacks. She changed her name to Lisbeth, but she stayed in Fall River, and she actually became very involved in the community. She did a lot of work with churches and charities. She ended up becoming worth about $10 million our money. Girl was well off.
She was loaded.
Her and her sister did not carry on a relationship, though. They moved apart from each other and didn't speak. Lizzie passed away in June of 1927, again, ending up being worth about $10 million. She left 30,000 of that. And that's not 30,000 real money, like our money. That's 30,000 1927 depths of the depression money.
Ugh.
$30,000 to an animal charity.
Oh, that's kind of sweet.
Because she was quoted saying that she has always loved animals.
Oh. Psychopaths, don't usually love animals. So.
It's true. And her sister, upon her death, left $100,000 to charity. So they were very much philanthropists. They did not speak at all. Lizzie died of pneumonia, and then her sister Emma died 9 days later. So I found the cutest picture of Lizzie before her death, and it's when she's older. I just wanted to show you this. And it's Lizzie sitting on the porch in front of this beautiful stone fireplace, holding a little Boston Terrier, and she just looks so happy and content. The dog looks a little evil, though.
Yeah, the dog, it looks very much like it's protecting her from something. Maybe the photographer, who knows?
Maybe.
It's crazy though. Like, I don't know, whenever you think of like the 1800s, like that time period, you like, I don't know, I picture people differently, but I mean, they were the same as us, basically.
What do you mean differently?
I picture them more old-timey, I guess. I don't know. I feel like conceptually they should be different.
Like they don't have dogs?
Well, no, like the way that she looks, the way she looks. You know what I'm saying? Like her, like when I look at that picture, I'm like, wow, she was a real person. Like, a duh, she is. But like, it was so long ago, it feels like she shouldn't be a real person.
Well, if you look at her older, well, not her older, but like pictures of her when she was younger, it does very much give you that like old Victorian feel. And she was very pretty. Like growing up, she was a very pretty young woman. I always thought that it was strange that she wasn't married because she was a very attractive and obviously very wealthy person. So she would have been pretty eligible.
I mean, there's some theories that I can throw out at you as like part of hauntings as to why.
I did hear the theories. There were a couple of theories that she was a lesbian, which I feel like is everybody's go-to when a woman isn't married. It's not always the case. Some people just don't want to get married. Some people don't like people. And she might have not
love. So
she might have really not liked people.
Right.
There were also some theories that her and her uncle did want to get married. There were some theories that her father was actually keeping him for herself.
Right.
Or keeping her for himself.
Right.
Which would explain the rage killing, but it wouldn't really explain the lack of conversation between her and her sister afterward, unless her sister didn't know. But going back to her being an attractive woman, her lawyers actually used that to their advantage, and they would dress her in very feminine clothing. Like it was a thing. What Lizzie was wearing to the trial that day, it would be in the newspapers. She would wear like very nice lacy feminine clothing, and then she would come in with like a bouquet of flowers, which was not just a wedding thing at the time. It was a common thing just to play up, I'm a woman, I could not do this. I love flowers and all things
delicate
lacy.
I carry these flowers everywhere with me. I wish I could carry flowers. I will start that trend again. Just carry flowers everywhere with me.
Carry flowers and have a menstrual bucket?
Yes. Those are the goals for 2022. I'm going to carry flowers and have a menstrual bucket.
We all have our menstrual buckets. It's okay.
Men will fear me and empathize with me. So
the house has gone on. I feel like it's always been a boarding house, but it has gone on to be a bed and breakfast. It recently sold for $2 million. And I think you're going to tell us all about the current status of the house.
Yes, and all of the good old hauntings as soon as I refill my drink.
Well, there it is, the history behind Lizzie Borden. We hope you guys enjoyed and will join us again next week as we go over all of the paranormal experiences Kristen has to share. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Haunted or Hoax Pod, Twitter at H or H Pod, and Facebook at Haunted or Hoax. Also, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcast. And also, if you can, rate us on Spotify. It's an awesome new feature they have, and it just helps kind of get the word out and get our podcast seen. And stay safe, guys. We will talk to y'all real soon. Bye!